Well, hello and welcome to everybody. Thanks for joining us for this final component of the series entitled Course Design with Career in Mind. This is a great opportunity because we have all of our presenters and I will be the host and panel moderator for this session, which is to have dialogue across these four sets of presenters. So those of you in the audience, your microphones will be muted for this presentation, but please post questions or comments in the chat. For those of you who are just joining us, let me introduce you to our panelists, Dr. William Woods, Dr. Charlie Minnick, Dr. Bill Davis, and Dr. Ron Beach from the Forbes School of Business and Technology, Dr. Barbara Hall from North Central University, Sarah Sonognini, who is with our Zovio partners, and Matthew Phillips from our Career Services area. So we will jump into a little bit of a panel presentation here. And I wanted to start with a reflection on what I heard this morning when I checked in to hear our keynote presenter this morning, Larry Robertson. And Larry was talking about the challenges that we face in the work environment today. And he made mention of the fact that when corporate business leaders are asked, what's the landscape in which you're working right now? That the number one response that CEOs, business owners, organizational leaders said is that this is an unpredictable landscape. And this has been the singular response for almost 20 years. It's unpredictable. And more so than just unpredictable, it's very complex. And Larry was talking about the characteristics then that are needed for success. And it struck me as I was listening to him, I wrote down a couple of notes. Build relationships and work well with others, deal with setbacks, communicate effectively, cope with difficulties, express creativity, adapt perpetually. And I scribbled down these notes this morning, and then as I listened to you wonderful presenters, what I thought was, wow, that's really what we're talking about here when we're talking about taking our courses and making certain that they're relevant for students as they're moving from the classroom back into career. So I thought I would kind of start, and I think the easiest way is you know, you can see a little yellow square around whoever's talking. So I'm going to toss out a question, and this first one will be for whoever wants to, you know, to start. But I probably would think that maybe William or Charlie would take this one. The practical aspects of your approach. So you talked about incorporating NACE competencies into the classroom and really getting students to learn about what these competencies are. What do you think are the practical applications of that? And then I'm going to ask others of you to jump in and build on what Charlie and William tell us.
I think the practical application part is when we sat to design the course, you know, we looked at what are some of the fundamental skills that we want people to be exposed to, I think. So that's why we looked at leadership skills to start with, because even it's in the four, it doesn't really matter, I don't think, what area you go into. You're going to have to work with other people. And how, with leadership, how do I engage and motivate other people? So I think that's the practical application of leadership skills. It is, no matter where you go, you're going to have to effectively work with other people. That's where team building fits in, all those NACE competencies, you know, with the ethics part of it. So I think that's how what we start out with is really leadership and skills. And the very first assignment we have students do in that class is SMART goals. Mm. So we talk about some personal, professional, academic SMART goals. And then I heard a lot about, and the speakers talk about scaffolding. We do a lot of that. And one builds on the next, builds on the next. So then when we get to the end, the practical piece at the end is they come up with a personal development plan. How are we going to integrate these things we talked about, starting with your SMART goals, to help you be successful in the long run, I think. So that's kind of how the the practical approach. It was real, it's reflective in nature, the courses. We have them think about, what skills are important, what are their strengths, what are their opportunity areas, and what do you have to do to continue to build on strengths, plus realize there's opportunity areas need to grow as well. So we really went a real practical looking at yourself approach, I think, in that class.
So start with self-awareness and then build self-management skills from there.
Yeah, I think it's pretty hard to effectively lead other people if you don't understand yourself first. I think you have to start internal, and then you have to kind of go out from there. So that's why we really, from day one in that course, we start that self-reflective internal piece.
Great. Others?
I'll add to that, so far as the practical side is concerned, and it goes right along with what he's saying, when you consider the SMART goals, if you look at oral and written communication, when you're interviewing, the written side is critically important. If you're going to get your resume looked at in the stack and not put in the disposal stack, it has to be really well written. It has to be well articulated. And then beyond that, when you're sitting in the interview, your physical presence and what you say and how you say it, and then using your people skills to relate to the person who is interviewing you. I mean, that's the practical side of, just that one particular NACE competency. And so it's something that they right away can use, because sometimes, I mean, your job may change, or a promotion opportunity may come up while you're taking your first class. And so you have to be ready. And so we automatically start getting them ready.
That's great. Thoughts from others about this practical aspect? Barbara, it struck me that if I were teaching Biz 105 and was beginning to introduce students to these competencies, I'd want them, I was thinking of a reflective journal, but in fact, that's kind of what a portfolio is in some respects, is to begin to capture my growth and my experiences in a systematic way. Do I have that right?
Yes, I think that's a great way to say it, Peggy. In some ways, a portfolio is just a giant reflective assignment in some ways, multimodal, of course. So I was thinking of a couple of practical applications. I think probably of all of them, mine was most focused on practicality, the perspective of practicality, not that it didn't have other things. So we talked about that it was a holistic approach to doing this, right? Not so this narrow application, but a more holistic approach. I think that much like some of the other presenters we were meeting students and faculty where they are and giving them just what they need when they need it. I think another aspect, like you mentioned, with Biz 105 being at the beginning of the program, getting them an understanding as the learner how they are experiencing this prepares them then when they are the designer or employer or colleague, how to design something like that themselves. So it helps you now and it helps you in the future.
Yeah. And Ron and Bill, Bill, I see you put your hand up, but I was going to ask how you integrate those NACE competencies with Maxwell's model.
Yeah, I think there's so many similarities and bridges here, to all of these. I mean, they intertwine. But I heard Barb say the word "meet them where they're at." I remember managing in my career, situational leadership. Who's mature, who's not mature. Kind of quickly getting a feel for who your audience is. And the one thing I want to say is EQ plays such an important role. Self-management, relationship management, social awareness, all that kind of thing. You got to kind of be able to be dialed in and kind of know, okay, here's where I'm at. And as Barb said, meet them where they're at. And I think the more you do that, the more you can take this content. But I'd like to say one thing about Biz 105, that, we just didn't get together and build a course. We did research, and we looked at who our students were and what the characteristics were and what the profiles were. And we sorted all this out, and we looked at this whole mix, and we said, we need a good introductory course. And all of a sudden we started to put this together. And from a practicality side, we got a little bit of something for everyone, you know, in there. And so when you look at it, they're setting goals. They're doing the NACE competency model. They're just learning, and it gets them off for the next one and the next one and the next one and the whole curriculum. So it's a wonderful course that's practical, that launches the student, increases persistence, confidence. So we're excited about that, as you can see.
I love your excitement.
And I'd like to kind of build on a little more on what William was going about. We need to, I like to stress to the students, the degree will help you get the job, but it's your education that'll help you keep it. Right? How well they write, how well they communicate, how well they interact. Yeah, in a virtual world, they may never meet the other, people they work with. You only know them by how they write or how they come across in a Zoom call and these type of things. And so really our involvement, and I think this is where I really kind of like the Maxwell program. It goes beyond just learning what they need to know, but how they need to use it to help themselves and their culture and be contributors. And that's where I really get excited about going through the whole thing.
Yeah, thank you. Sarah and Matt, one of the little notes I scribbled down here is that, Barbara talked about portfolio, which is a particular kind of tool to be built into the classroom. Maybe you could speak about how we leverage that in the classroom. And Barb gave us some really practical, like, don't forget these things, as you're planning for it. You guys, as instructional designer and career focus, speak to how you would see that integrated into some of the coursework and the work that you're doing. Seems to fit very naturally hand in hand.
Sure, it does. I'll take part of this, Matt, and you can add to it if you have something else. One thing that we have found, students are, seeing really the relevancy and building on each other's feedback, is having students work on their e-portfolio and then share out their links with other students in discussion forums. And so that way they can review each other's work and their knowledge, skills, and abilities that they're kind of showcasing, or how, the artifacts that they're sharing out, and get feedback that's structured, and learn from each other as they're going along and reviewing each other's work. So I think that has added some value, and we're leveraging it that way.
Well, and it would seem like there's a dimensionality to that, Sarah, that would also help in that. So, a few of us on the call here we're good baby boomers, and we have some Gen Xers on the call, and we've got some millennials on the call, and each group, not to cast a stereotypical kind of perspective, but we each view the workplace a little bit differently depending on where we came from. And it seems to me that these kinds of exercises that build in the peer feedback and the review and the support help provide that spectrum across generations, so that, if a boomer is being interviewed by a millennial, it's really different than a millennial being interviewed by a boomer, right? So, the smartness of some of these preparation tools really could make a difference between somebody getting a second look or a second ask back. Matt, were you going to jump in there?
Yeah, well, I agree with you completely. I mean, the most easy thing to point to with what, related to what you're saying is the resume, right? The resume has changed immensely over the past 15 years. We get students who are, mid-level management, for instance, who come to us and they're looking for resume assistance, and not because they don't know how to write a great resume or they don't have great accomplishments, but because they don't understand how applicant tracking systems work, right? Or how to optimize their tools online you can use to do that. So I think that's a great example. I would also add, as it relates to portfolios, and you know, I don't know what everybody thinks, but these tools change pretty rapidly. I've used portfolios to secure my last 3 positions. And they have made the difference, quite frankly, absolutely have made the difference in whether I got the job or not. And I was fortunate to go through an undergraduate program where that was part of what we worked on. But, you know, I think it was Jana Cole on your team, Sarah. She came up with a new way to use Folio in the classroom because the way it was working was there were so many projects, which I think you talked about, Barb. There were so many projects in these portfolios, how to curate them. You know, in Folio, there's a way to create one project and add multiple components to that project. So now in the class, in one course, they create one project. They're trained how to do that. And then they add the components as they build a portfolio-based summative assignment. So there are lots of ways that it's evolving, and it's hard to stay on top of it. But if we keep looking for ways to innovate, I think that will help students the most.
Yeah. You know, I need to put on my hat as a program evaluator and say, how do we assess the value or the benefit to these efforts? What do we know from research about whether or not they work? And how do we assess that? How do we build that in? Because there's lots of great ideas, but we ought to be focused on those where there's some evidence that they're producing outcomes that are valuable for our students. Who wants to jump at that one?
I'm going to jump at that one from that perspective. Sorry, Bill. Jump at that from the perspective of the portfolio, because remember in my presentation, one of the things that we talked about is that the portfolio should be student-centric and learner-controlled. And so part of that assessment piece and the value in determining whether we met that value is what the learner's goal for it is. Now, of course, again, there are the industry standards, career competencies, or maybe industry competencies might be the better way to say that, and then your course and programmatic and institutional learning outcomes. But again, it is supposed to be something for and by and controlled by the learner. And so we have to, you know, you got to ask them at the beginning or along the way at multiple times, because it'll change. What will you use this for?
Fair enough. Bill, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, just a quick point. I really love what Matt said about, you know, narrowing it down, because there isn't a one size fits all, you know, so, and it's constantly in a state of change. It's very dynamic. And Barbara brings up a fantastic point, because you know, when you start to look at what you're actually going for, you know, what industry segment, you know, what demographics, psychographics, all that kind of stuff, you know, what's really entailed in what you're searching for. That's where these professionals like Matt and Career Services and Sarah all come in, because right now we're working with a student, Matt and I, from the construction industry, or not construction, petroleum industry, you know, that they're helping them make a good fit. But I think if you just said, well, you know, put your portfolio together and put that out there and they'll see this and they'll love it, I think we'd be doing them a disservice, you know, and Barbara knows that. And that's not a knock on portfolio, not at all. But I think from the customization side, we got to know some of these profiles of these segments of where we send people to, because when I used to interview, if they got through the door with all that, you know, the paper and the resume, I was asking open-ended questions. Tell me about yourself. And I want to see if they rambled on and they weren't, you know, focused, or did they really help me see some things maybe that I need, because I knew the kind of candidate I wanted. And so I just think that Career Services, Sarah, Matt, Grace, Rebecca, unbelievable, the service that you provide for our students. And I mean that sincerely, because I have seen success story after success story. And I know if I was out there shopping, I'd be knocking on your door too. So you're wonderful.
Well, I think, Bill, you're making a good point here, particularly about the customization, because we've all seen resumes that come across our desk that say the objective of this interview or this is to get a job with XYZ company. And I think, I'm not XYZ company. You didn't even change up the letter. And attention to detail, for me at least, at the point of interviewing, I mean, what document is more important than your resume, right? And
Maybe the portfolio itself.
Yes. If you're going to have misspellings or if it's sloppy work, then that really tells me something about, the individual who's coming through the door. I think maybe I'd like to maybe switch just a little bit, because I asked about how do we evaluate it. So help me understand, those of you who are certainly encouraging the Maxwell characteristics in faculty and in our approach to working with students, our NACE competencies for beginning to build confidence and competence in our students, and the tools to do that. Well, how do our students understand and appreciate it? How do we teach them to use these tools effectively? How do we teach them to talk about themselves in a different way?
Well, I'll venture into that. One of the things, like when you were mentioning the NACE competencies, they're based upon research. And so they're based upon data points saying this is what the industry, the market, or the job field that you're interested in needs. So therefore, if we explain those kind of things to the students and how it's going to benefit them, and we raise their awareness, and then make it so that they can start concentrating on those things, thinking about those things, and then as they get more proficient in each of those areas, they start to really talk about those things, get excited about those things, and maybe even read further into those areas, so that now, knowing what potential employers want, then they get to live it and talk it and breathe it and eat it. And so that when they are sitting in an interview, it's natural to them. There's nothing better than being in an interview and feel like you're totally on cue, and that everything that you say has meaning, and everything that you're saying, they're waiting for you to say something else because you're just living it. So, I mean, it's exciting if you can do that with your students.
Yeah.
And William, you bring up such great points, because you just got to know your segment, your audience, once we prepare the student, now they're off into another culture, and they could be doing behavioral interviewing. They could be talking to 10 different people. So you really need to get kind of buttoned up to kind of know what your skills are, what your attributes are, what kind of value can you bring to this organization, have that prepared in advance. May never even come up in a conversation, but boy, if you're lucky enough to get through that door, you want to be ready.
In Allie's school, this year is the big example of that. Now, all of a sudden, you have to add to your skill sets, be able to teach online to kindergartners, first graders, and second graders, and be able to hold their attention somehow through that particular modality.
I am very glad I'm not a K-12 teacher right now, having to deal with some of that. Oh my goodness. A question then back to Bill and Ron, because I was so struck by Maxwell's ideas. Have you taken this in a formal sense to colleagues? Because it seems to me that I think Bill mentioned that when you're an associate faculty, it can be a lonely job. You're kind of out there in the wherever you are, teaching courses and sometimes feeling connected to the institution. And I wonder if there's a way we could take these ideas, take these concepts, and pull our associate faculty in with those, because it takes, when we're talking about helping students really develop themselves, it's much more than just teaching them content in the class. It's about teaching them to learn and grow as individuals. So what do we need to do with our faculty to share this message of how they can be effective?
Well, I've got one for you, because it just bubbled to the surface of my brain. So Ron, excuse me, I'm going to go first, and then you can jump in. I want to tell you, my whole teaching platform has been on active learning, process of doing and observing, dialogue with self and others. I try to create that in a course setting. And what I just want to say is repetition is an active learning technique. And what I do when I meet colleagues like you, Peggy, and and for the first time, or those that I've known for years. If there's something that I think can add value, for example, this JMT culture sheet, so whether it's JMT notes on managing during COVID times from John Maxwell's seminar, I will share that. I will share that out. So it's more of a one-on-one, but I think when you explore, because that's what education is all about, is, you know, discovery and all that, and get together just in some panels or chats like this, because I'm pulling a lot of nuggets out of this today. You know, I love what Barb said about meet them where they're at. And I know everybody's potential and everybody's contribution, but my recommendation is, if you want the behavior, repetition, 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 but it's got to be, like you said, valid stuff. But Maxwell stuff does move and motivate, and it inspires.
Right. And Sarah and Matt and Barb, I'm going to come back to you. So I'm a beleaguered associate faculty member, and you've just added a whole bunch of work to my classroom with these different kinds of things that I've never worked with before. Are you getting any pushback from instructors? Obviously not your instructors who want you to put these in the courses, but have you heard of any concerns or issues of faculty members for using some of these different tools? Because sometimes different means, oh, that's more work for me. And I wonder if you've gotten any pushback from that. And if so, how have you dealt with it?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, new things are scary. And of course, teaching an online course where you have tools that, you know, things can go wrong, it's scary. It's going to, you know, cause more work for you. And so I think so there has been some pushback, but ultimately a lot of times when we just showcase the tool working in another course and, you know, how students are receiving it or not receiving it, you know, we have to look at everything really objectively and through that lens. And so a lot of times, you know, faculty get excited about new innovative things in their classroom. But it can be scary, definitely.
Yeah, Barb, what's been your experience?
Yes, again, for students and instructors alike, because even good change is hard. I think it's particularly hard for our part-time faculty because, or even a full-timer if you only just teach one or two of the courses, because again, the focus on the holistic approach across the program, but you teach this one course, and it's probably, of course, going to be one of those courses towards the beginning where the fit of the portfolio task is sticky, as I said. And so you're like, what is this in here? Why am I? Well, of course, that just, as the director of curriculum, that's how I hear it. Yeah. And so, yes, definitely. I think some of the greatest things are if they teach other courses, they see the value. Certainly when they see our first graduates, when they graduated from the program, people certainly appreciated that. But that's another reason why we also provided all of those resources too, so that they're not just thrown in here with this new thing they have to do. As our parts, making sure we've done everything for them that we can do and made it as easy as possible.
Yeah, because I can imagine faculty don't want to feel dumb when they're supposed to be, you know, the faculty member, and they don't want to be awkward with the tools.
Yes, right. You have to help them be able to help the students as well as themselves.
Can I add one thing to that? I agree with what both of you said completely. I think that one of the NACE competencies, oral written communication, Dr. Woods, you've talked about this. One of the most important skills you can have is the ability to formulate an argument through oral and written communication. And so when you're a stakeholder in a course, especially if you've been invited by a subject matter expert, your job is, I think, to marshal support, right? To build the argument for why you should use a specific tool or why a certain thing should be in a course if it's your subject matter expertise. And that can be a challenge. And many times I've been argued against in a way that made a lot of sense. And Folio is a great example where instructional designers have made the argument like, that's not the place for this. And here's the reason, right? And so that push and pull between really smart people is, I think, where a lot of the great stuff happens. So I think it has to be a real collaboration, and you have to be willing to be agile and collaborate to build these great things. Like, that's just the way it works, in my opinion.
I actually love that as a closing note, Matt. And unfortunately we're at the end of our time. I'd like to buy everybody a cup of coffee or an adult beverage and continue this, but I know we'll all need to move on to something else. So let me just repeat my thanks for your individual presentations and then for working here on this panel. It's been a heck of a lot of fun. It feels to me like a little mini vacation where I got to listen to some really smart people talking about really interesting topics. So I appreciate everything you've contributed. Thank you. Thank you to our audience members. Love that you joined us for part of this. And remember that these, all of these presentations will be recorded and available on the TLC website. So again, thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday. You know, keep working for those students. Appreciate it all.